At 63 years old, the only things left to Orla Vandermeer's name were $46 in a coffee can, a truck that started when it felt like it, and a folded deed to the abandoned telephone exchange on the edge of Kettle Bend. A squat brick building the whole town had spent 30 years pretending was already gone. The county had listed its value at $1. Not low. $1, the price a man pays for a thing nobody will take off his hands for free. There was a line under the assessment, typed by some clerk who had never set foot inside, that read obsolete wiring. No salvage. Condemned, that was the sum of it. $46, a stubborn truck, and $1 worth of brick and dead copper that had belonged to the husband she had buried 11 days before. A man she had slept beside for 31 years, and was only now beginning to understand she had never truly known. She had gone out there meaning to sell it, or to sign it over to the county and be free of the taxes, or simply to lock the door one last time and drive away. She meant to be done with the place by dark. Instead, on that first cold evening, she found the switchboard logbooks still sitting on their shelf under a skin of dust. Decades of handwriting recording who had called whom in the small hours, and by the time she understood what those columns of names really were, she understood that the abandoned exchange had never been worthless at all, and that she herself had been written into its pages years before she ever held the key. Before we go any further, if stories like this one mean something to you, take a second and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. It helps more than you know, and I think you are going to want to be here for what she found. Her husband's name had been Halvard, and for the last 4 days of his life he had said almost nothing at all. The doctors called it the quiet that comes at the end. Orla called it the same thing he had done their whole marriage long, only more so. He had been a man built out of long silences and small mercies, a lineman, and then a switchboard keeper back when Kettle Bend still had an operator sitting at a board of brass jacks and cloth-covered cords, connecting one farmhouse to another with the plug of a cable and a soft say the word. When the phone company pulled the direct lines through in the middle of the century and the exchange went dark, most towns tore the buildings down. Kettle Bend did not, because Halvard bought the little brick exchange for $1 and never told a soul why he had wanted it. Orla had asked him, once, early on, in the second year of their marriage, what he intended to do with a dead telephone building. He had been quiet a long moment, as he always was before every sentence that mattered, and then he had said, "A place like that isn't finished just because the lines went dead. Somebody ought to keep the door on it." She had laughed and let it go, as a young wife lets go of the odd corners of the man she has married, thinking there would be years to understand them. There had been years. There had been 31 of them. And still she had not understood, and now he was gone, and the understanding was going to have to come from the building itself. The morning she drove out to Kettle Bend's edge, the first hard frost of the year had come down over the northern plains, silvering the stubble fields and the cottonwood windbreaks, and the long straight road that ran out past the grain co-op toward the river. She was a lean, upright woman, with silver hair pinned back plainly, and a few strands escaping at the temple, dressed in a dark wool shawl over a chore coat, because the furnace money had gone to the funeral home. Her hands, when they rested on the wheel, were the hands of a woman who had canned and mended and buried and gone on. She did not cry as she drove. She had done her crying in the 11 days behind her, and there was a practical errand in front of her now, and Orla Vandermeer had always been better at errands than at grief. The exchange sat where the gravel spur ran out and the town thinned into field. It was smaller than she remembered, smaller in the way things always shrink when you come back to them alone. Brick the color of dried blood, an arched doorway with a stone lintel, and along the top a painted sign gone to ghosts, the letters just barely readable under the weather, and the climbing ivy that had swallowed half the front wall. Kettle Bend Mutual Telephone, it said. And under that, in smaller ghost letters, Est 1912. One tall ground-floor window still held its glass. The rest were boarded or broken. It looked exactly like what the county said it was, a tear-down, a dead thing, $1 of brick that a wiser widow would have signed away and forgotten. A wave of something close to bitter disappointment moved through her as she stood at the foot of it in the cold. This was the thing Halvard had kept a secret for 31 years. This was the corner of himself he had never let her see. A ruin, a pile of obsolete wiring with no salvage. She almost got back in the truck. She would tell people later that she could not say why she stayed, only that the light was going, and the drive home was long, and it seemed foolish to make the trip twice. So she took the old brass key from the canvas satchel on her shoulder. The key Halvard had kept on a string in his sock drawer for 3 decades, and she went to the arched door and let herself in. The smell hit her first, dust and cold copper and machine oil gone to varnish, and under it, faint and impossible, the smell of him, of Halvard, of the pipe tobacco he had given up 20 years before, and the wool of his coats. The front room was a single long space, and it stopped her breath, because this was no ruin, whatever the outside had promised. Someone had been keeping it. Not living in it, but keeping it, tending it as you tend a grave. The switchboard stood against the far wall, a tall dark cabinet of oak and brass, its rows of jacks and cords intact. Its little paper number cards yellowed but legible in their brass frames. A wooden operator's chair sat before it, worn smooth on the arms, and on a shelf beside the board, in a row like books in a country library, stood the logbooks. Dozens of them. Leather and cloth spines, dates inked on each one in a careful, familiar hand, the earliest gone soft with age, the most recent one. She saw with a small cold shock, dated only the year before. Halvard had come out here. All those evenings she had thought he was down at the co-op or checking the cattle or simply being a man who liked his own company in the shed, he had been driving out to this silent telephone exchange to write in a book. She stood in the doorway a long moment with the frost coming in behind her, and then she crossed the floor, her boots loud on the boards, and she struck a match to the kerosene lamp that stood ready on the operator's desk with a box beside it, as though someone had known she would come. The flame took. The room warmed to amber. And Orla Vandermeer, 63 and worth $46, sat down in her dead husband's chair before the board he had never mentioned, and reached for the topmost book, never knowing that she had just set a light burning in that window as he had set it, quietly, on 100 cold nights, for reasons she was about to spend the rest of the story learning. The first book she opened was the recent one, and at first the columns made no sense to her. There were dates down the left margin, and times, most of them late. 10 and 11 at night, 1 and 2 after midnight. There were names. And beside each name, in Halvard's small hand, a few words. She read the top entry without understanding it. A date the previous November, near 11 at night, and then the name Delphine Aumont, and beside it the words called about the boy, talked till she could sleep. Below that, another night, another name, Rufus Selk, and the words wanted to hear a voice, stayed on till the co-op whistle. She turned a page. The nights ran on. Ivy Cormier could not stop crying, walked her through to morning. Old Ambrose Tytell thought his heart was going, kept him company till the ambulance. On and on, night after night, name after name. A record of who in Kettle Bend had reached out into the dark and found her husband on the other end of the line. But that was the thing she could not make fit. The lines were dead. The exchange had been dark for 50 years. There was no board to plug a call into, no operator's headset humming, no way on earth for Delphine Aumont or Rufus Selk or any of them to have reached Halvard at this building at 1 in the morning. And yet here it was in his own hand, dated and timed. A logbook of night calls at a telephone exchange that had not connected anyone since before she was a bride. She sat with the lamp hissing softly and the frost ticking on the one unbroken window, and for the first time since the funeral, Orla felt something other than tiredness. She felt the pull of a question, and somewhere under it, the first faint warmth of a thing she did not yet have words for. She did not know it yet, but she was not going to be selling this building. And 3 nights from now, when she understood what those logbooks really were, she would come to understand her husband, and her town, and her own name, in a way 31 years of marriage had never managed to teach her. Stay with me, because this is where it stops being a story about an abandoned telephone exchange, and becomes a story about what he wrote in those books, and about the one name in them she never expected to find. To understand why those logbooks stopped her cold, you have to understand what the 11 days before them had emptied out of her. Halvard had gone in his sleep, which the neighbors all said was a mercy, and Orla supposed it was, though a mercy for whom she was not sure. She had woken beside him and known before she touched him. There is a stillness a body has that a sleeping body does not, and 31 years teaches you the difference in the dark. She had not screamed. She had lain there a while in the gray light and held his hand, which was already cool, and then she had gotten up and made the calls a person makes, and started down the long corridor of arrangements that grief hides behind so you do not have to feel it all at once. What the arrangements had shown her was how little there was. Halvard had never been a man who talked about money, and she had assumed, as a wife assumes, that his silence on the subject meant there was enough and no need to speak of it. There was not enough. There was the small house, mortgaged twice, and the truck, and a checking account that the funeral had all but drained, and at the bottom of it, when the last check cleared, $46 tucked in a coffee can on the shelf over the stove, where she had kept the grocery money since the first year they were married. 63 years of age. $46. A husband in the ground, and a stack of bills on the table addressed to a man who could no longer read them. She had sat at that table the night before she drove out to the exchange, and looked at the coffee can, and felt the particular loneliness that comes when you have just learned that the man she trusted with everything had somehow left her with almost nothing, and had never once let her see it coming. That was the wound, and it had a barb in it worse than the poverty. It was the not knowing. All those evenings he had driven off after supper with a nod and a thermos. All those Saturdays. She had thought she was married to a quiet man who liked his own company. Now she was beginning to wonder whether she had been married to a stranger, whether the whole 31 years had been a house with a locked room in it, and whether the man they buried had been keeping something from her that she was only going to learn from the mouths of other people, which is the worst way for a wife to learn anything. She had gone to the exchange half, hoping to find nothing, because nothing would have been simpler. A dead building is only a dead building. But she had found the logbooks, and the logbooks were not nothing, and now the locked room in the house of her marriage had a door, and the door was standing open, and she was afraid of what was on the other side of it. There was no one to help her make sense of it. That was the other thing the 11 days had made plain. Her people were gone, or scattered. Her sister had passed 4 winters back. She and Halvard had never been given children, a sorrow they had carried quietly and separately, and never quite learned to carry together. The neighbors were kind, as small-town neighbors are kind, with casseroles and cards and a firm handshake at the graveside, but kindness like that has a shelf life of about 2 weeks, and then a widow is expected to be getting on with it. There was no family expecting her. No one would notice, particularly, whether Orla Vandermeer drove out to a shuttered telephone exchange every evening or sat home alone with a coffee can and $46. The building, she was beginning to feel, was the only thing in the whole cold county that seemed to want her to come back. She came back the next morning. She told herself it was practical, that she had to inventory the place before she could sell it, that a buyer would want to know what was inside. But she brought a thermos and a sandwich and a spare pair of wool socks. And a woman does not pack a spare pair of wool socks for a place she means to leave by noon. Kettle Bend in the daylight was a town holding its breath as plains towns do in the first weeks of winter, smoke standing straight up from the chimneys, the grain elevator throwing its long shadow across Main Street, 3 trucks angled in front of the co-op, and not a soul on the sidewalk. She stopped at the co-op for coffee and a look at people, because the house had gotten very quiet, and it was there at the counter that she got her first taste of what the town thought of the things she had inherited. The man behind the counter was named Cyril DeForest, a heavy-set man near 70 who had run the co-op counter since before Orla was married, and he had known Halvard the better part of both their lives. He set her coffee down and did not take her money, which was its own small kindness, and then he leaned on the counter and looked at her with the careful softness you turn on someone you have decided to be gentle with. "You've been out to the old exchange, then," he said. It was not quite a question. Word travels in a town of 600 faster than the lines ever carried it. "I have," Orla said. "I mean to see about selling it." Cyril made a sound in his chest that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. "Sell it," he said. "Orla, I don't know who told you that place was worth the paper the deed's printed on. County had it condemned back in the spring. Wiring's shot, roof's going, and there isn't a man in 3 counties fool enough to buy a dead phone building full of copper that won't even fetch scrap." He shook his head slowly. "Halvard, God rest him, that building was the one thing about him nobody ever could figure. Kept it up all those years for no reason a soul could see. You'd do better to let the county take it for the back taxes and be shut of it. That's the truth, and I say it because I'm fond of you." "Cyril," she said, "did you ever go out there? At night, I mean. When it was hard." The big man went still behind his counter, and for just a moment something crossed his face that had nothing to do with copper or scrap or back taxes. "Now why would you ask me a thing like that?" he said quietly. "No reason," Orla said. "Only that a man who calls a place worthless 5 different ways in one breath sometimes protests it more than he needs to." Cyril looked down at the counter and moved a jar of pickled eggs half an inch to the left. "Drink your coffee, Orla," was all he said, and there was no unkindness in it, only a door pulled shut. He meant it kindly. She could hear that he meant it kindly. But there was a thing under the kindness, a settled certainty that the building was worthless and that Halvard's care for it had been a harmless old man's foolishness, and something in Orla, some stubborn thing she had not known was still in her, set its heels against that certainty. She thought of the logbooks. She thought of the names. She did not tell Cyril DeForest about them. She was not sure why, except that they felt suddenly like the only thing she had that was hers, and she felt no readiness to hand them across a co-op counter to be explained away as an old man's hobby. "I'll think on it," was all she said, and she took her coffee out to the truck and drove to the exchange. And she felt the town's easy dismissal riding along with her the whole distance, and it made her want to open every one of those books. There was someone waiting for her at the exchange when she got there, standing beside a clean county car with a clipboard held against the wind. He was a young man, maybe 30, in a good coat that had never done a day of work, with the pink careful look of someone who spends his days in a heated office. He introduced himself as an assessor from the county seat, sent out to confirm the condition of the condemned structure so the parcel could be scheduled for demolition in the spring. His name was Prosper Lindqvist, and he was not unkind, only sure of himself as people are sure of themselves when they have read a file and never opened a door. "You'd be the widow," he said, glancing at his clipboard. "Vandermeer, I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. I'll only need a few minutes. The structure's already condemned, so this is really just paperwork. Once the estate clears probate, the county will take it for the back taxes owed, and we'll have it down before the ground thaws. Save you the liability. These old buildings, they're nothing but a fall hazard and a copper theft magnet." He said it pleasantly, tapping his pen on the clipboard. "There's some back taxes on it, I should tell you. Not a lot, but more than the parcel's worth. You'd have to pay them to keep it, and I'd not advise it. There's nothing in there worth a widow's money." Orla stood at the arched door with the old brass key in her hand and looked at this pleasant young man who had decided, on paper, what her husband's life's work was worth. "You've read the file," she said. "Have you been inside it?" Prosper Lindquist blinked. "Ma'am, I don't need to go inside a condemned structure to know its condition. That's what the file's for. So that would be a no," Orla said. "You've decided what my husband's life was worth from the seat of a heated car off a card typed by somebody who never opened the door." She let that sit a moment in the cold. "How much?" she said then. "The back taxes." "How much would it take to keep it?" Prosper Lindquist checked his clipboard, a little surprised she had asked. "Comes to $318, he said, "with the penalties. Due at month's end if you meant to save it, which, ma'am, I truly wouldn't." That figure. She had 46. He might as well have said 30,000. She felt the number land in her chest like a stone dropped down a dry well, and she felt, right behind it, the old plain stubbornness come up to meet it. She had no notion yet where such a sum would come from. But standing at that door with the logbooks waiting inside, she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she was not going to let them knock this building down in the spring. "I'll let you know before the month is out," she said. "Now, if you don't mind, I've got an inventory to take." And she let herself in and shut the arched door on the county and the wind, and she was alone with the board and the books and the one tall, unbroken window, and she meant to find out, before the deadline came, exactly what her dead husband had thought was worth keeping the door on. She started with the oldest book, and that was the first rung of the staircase she would spend 3 nights climbing. The oldest logbook was bound in cracked black leather, and its first dated entry was from a winter the year she and Halvard were married, the year the exchange officially went dark, when the phone company pulled the last of the switchboard's live lines and paid Halvard his final wage as the keeper of a board that no longer connected anything. The first entry read, in a younger, firmer version of his hand, "Lines dead as of today. Company says tear it out. Won't. Some folks got nobody to call and nowhere the call would go. Board's dead, but the room isn't. First night I'll light the wick and see who comes." And under it, that same night, a single name and a single line. Present Hulda Bran, lost her man in October, sat with her by the stove till she stopped shaking. Didn't say much, didn't need to. Orla read it twice. The board was dead. Everyone agreed the board was dead, the county, the phone company, Cyril DeForest, the young assessor with his clipboard. But her husband had kept its door, and he had set a light burning behind the glass, and people had come, not to make calls, because there were no calls to make. They had come to the glow itself. In a town spread thin across the cold plains, where the nearest neighbor might be 2 miles down a gravel road and the winter nights ran 16 hours long, Halvard had turned a shut-down telephone exchange into the one place a person could go when they could not stand to be alone with the dark. The night call log was not a record of telephone calls. It was a record of who had come to the burning window in the small hours, and what they had needed, and how her quiet husband had sat with them until they could bear to go home. And beside every name, in 31 years of entries, there was never a word about money. Only who came, and what they carried, and that he had kept the flame going until they could sleep. She sat back in the operator's chair and put her hand over her mouth, and the lamp hissed, and beyond the unbroken window the short plains afternoon was already going blue toward dark. All those evenings, all those Saturdays, the thermos and the nod in the drive out past the co-op, he had not been keeping his own company. He had been keeping everyone else's. And he had never told her, not once in all their years together, and she sat there in the amber light and felt 2 things at war in her chest. A grief so sharp it stole her breath, and under it, rising. A fierce and unfamiliar pride in the stranger she had married. If you have made it this far, do me a small kindness and hit that subscribe button, because what Orla found written in the back of that oldest book, on a night 3 days from now, is the part of this story I have been waiting to tell you, and I do not want you to miss it. The witness came to her on the second evening, and she nearly did not let him in. She had put a match to the lamp and stood it in the window, as the first entry said Halvard had done, half as an experiment, and half because the room was too full of him to sit in the dark. She was deep in the third logbook when she heard the crunch of tires on the gravel, and then a slow, uneven step on the flagstones outside, and a knuckle against the arched door. 3 soft raps. When she opened it, there stood an old man leaning on a cane, 90 if he was a day, in a heavy wool coat with a scarf wound twice around his throat, his hair gone to a few white wisps, his eyes heavy-lidded and pale and knowing. He looked past her shoulder at the flame in the window, and something moved across his face that she could only call relief. "So it's true," he said. His voice was a dry rustle, like wind in the corn stubble. "Somebody's got the wick burning again. I saw it from the county road last night, and I thought my eyes were playing tricks. Been dark out here since Halvard passed." He peered at her. "You'd be his wife." "Orla," he said her name as though he had known it a long time. "My name's Wendell Faucine. I expect he never told you about me. He never told anybody about anybody. That was the whole point of the place." And he asked, very courteously, if a man who had known her husband for 60 years might come in out of the cold and sit by the stove a while, and Orla, who had spent 11 days starving for someone who could tell her who her husband had been, stepped back and let him in. She got the little stove going and made tea in the enamel pot that stood ready, and Wendell Faucine lowered himself into the operator's chair with a groan, and looked around the room as a man looks at a church he has not been inside in years. "Nothing's changed," he said softly. "Not a thing." He kept it exactly as old President Bran had it when he took over the board. He nodded at the shelf of logbooks. "You've been reading, I see. Then you know part of it. But you don't know why, and I'm about the last one left who does, so I'll tell you, if you'll pour an old man his tea." She poured. And Wendell Faucine told her the thing that reframed 3 decades of silence, the thing that turned the stranger she had buried back into a man, and then into something more than a man. "Your Halvard," he said, "was the loneliest boy this town ever raised. His mother went into the ground when he was 9, and his father followed her into the bottle, and there wasn't a soul looked after that boy but the old telephone operator that ran this board, a widow woman named Hulda Bran. She's the first name in that first book, I'd wager." Orla nodded. She was. She used to let him sit by the switchboard nights when his daddy was in his cups, so the boy wouldn't have to be home alone with the night. And she taught him the one thing he carried the rest of his life, which was this. She told him a telephone exchange isn't wires and brass. It's the place a town's voices come together in the dark. And when there's a person on the line who's got nobody, the whole job, the only job that ever mattered, is to stay on the line with them till morning. He sipped his tea. When the company killed the lines, everybody said the exchange was dead. Halvard said the wires were dead. The exchange, he said, is wherever somebody keeps a light burning for the ones who can't stand the dark. So he bought it for $1 and he set that lamp going, and for 50 years, near enough, this town had one place you could go at 2 after midnight when the walls were closing in, and know there'd be a light on and a man who'd sit with you and never ask you a question, and never tell a living soul you'd come. Orla sat very still. "But the names," she said. "Delphine Aumont. Rufus Selk. There are hundreds of them. This whole town. Near about all of it, over the years," Wendell said. "You don't know the half of who's in those books, and neither does the town, because that was the sacred part. Nobody knew who else had come. A man could sit with your Halvard about the worst night of his life and pass you on the street next morning and neither of you the wiser. That's how he could carry the whole town's secrets and never be a gossip. That's why folks think the building's worthless." He gave a dry chuckle. "Worthless, that building's got more of Kettleben's soul in it than the church does. But nobody says so, because to say so, you'd have to admit you'd been out here on your worst night, and nobody wants to admit that. So they all agree it's just old wiring, and they leave it be, and not one of them knows the others are lying too." He looked at her with his heavy pale eyes. I know because I came. More than once. After my wife. After my boy. Your Halvard sat with me till the co-op whistle blew, more nights than I can count, and I never paid him a dime and he never asked. And I'll tell you what I told him the last night I came. I said, Halvard, how do you carry all of it, everybody's grief, and never break? And you know what he said. Orla shook her head. He said, I don't carry it. I just keep the light on. The Lord carries it. I'm only the fellow who keeps the door on. It was full dark now beyond the tall pane of glass, and the planes cold pressed at the window, and the lamp threw the two of them in amber against the tall dark shape of the dead switchboard. Orla found that she was crying, quietly, in a way she had not let herself cry at the funeral, and it was not the crying of grief exactly. It was the crying of a woman who has just been handed back the husband she thought she had lost twice, once to death and once to a lifetime of silence, and found him larger than she had ever guessed. Why? She managed. Why did he never tell me? 31 years, Wendell. I'd have helped him. I'd have come out here with him. Why keep it from his own wife? Wendell Faucine was quiet a long moment, turning his teacup in his old hands. I asked him that too once, he said. About you. I said, Halvard, that woman would understand this better than anybody. Why don't you bring her out? And he got that look he got. Orla knew the look. She had spent 31 years learning the look. He said, one day she'll need this place more than any of them, and when that day comes I want it to be hers, clean, with no debt of gratitude on it, nothing owed. If I bring her out now, it becomes ours, something we do together, and it won't be waiting for her when she needs it. So I keep it separate. I keep it hers. Wendell set down his cup. He said, when I'm gone she'll come out here to sell it, and she'll find the books, and the books will tell her who I was better than I ever could to her face, because I never could say these things out loud, not even to her, God forgive me. He knew you'd come, Orla. He kept the place hers the whole time. He just couldn't say it while he was living. Some men are like that. The kindest ones, mostly. Wendell Faucine left near midnight, refusing her offer to drive him, saying he had walked the county road on worse nights than this, and the walk was the only thing that let an old man sleep. Before he went, he stopped at the door and looked back at the switchboard, and he said one more thing. There's a drawer in the bottom of that board, he said, left-hand side, under the cord shelf. Sticks, Halvard kept the important things in there, the things he didn't write in the open books. I only know because I saw him lock it, once, and put the little key back on top of the door frame where a tall man can reach it and a short one can't. He tapped his cane on the flagstone. I never asked what was in it. Wasn't mine to ask. But it might be yours, now. And then the old witness went out into the dark, and Orla heard his uneven step fade down the gravel, and she was alone with the lamp and the board and the thing Wendell had just told her, and she did not sleep at all that night, though not from grief this time. From the pull of the drawer, she waited until the third evening to open it, and she would never be able to explain, afterward, why she waited, except that she had begun to understand that this building rewarded patience, that it gave up its meaning slowly as the plains give up spring, and that whatever was in the locked drawer was the last thing her husband had left her, and there would be no more after it. She wanted to be ready. So she spent the third day paying her respects to the rest of the books, reading names, and by the end of it she understood the full shape of what Halvard had done. Over 50 years, in a town that never knew, her husband had sat up through the worst nights of hundreds of lives. New widows, boys home from wars with the sheikhs, farmers the season had ruined, a young mother, more than one, who had come out to the burning window at 3 a.m. with a colicky baby and nowhere else on earth to be, just to have another grown person keeping watch through the night with her. He had connected no telephone calls. He had connected people to the simple fact that they were not, on their worst night, entirely alone. The county called it obsolete wiring. Orla was beginning to think it was the most valuable thing in the county, and it had cost her husband $1 and every free evening of his life, and he had counted it cheap at the price. When the light began to fail on the third evening, she lit the wick and set it in the window, and then she reached up over the door frame where a tall man might hide a small key from a short woman, and her fingers found it, cold and toothed, exactly where Wendell said it would be. Her hands were not steady as she knelt at the base of the board and worked the little key into the sticking drawer and eased it open against its swollen wood. Inside there was not gold. There was not cash. There was a single logbook, thinner than the others, its cover a soft worn green, and on its spine. In Halvard's hand, one word. Orla, her own name. She lifted it out with both hands as you lift something that might break, and she carried it to the operator's chair, and she sat down in the amber light and opened the book that Halvard had kept, in secret, about her. It began the year they married. The first entry read, "She thinks I bought this place for no reason. Can't tell her the reason yet. The reason is, she's the loneliest person I ever met besides myself, and doesn't know it, and someday the world's going to take everything from her, just as it took everything from me, and when it does, I want there to be a lit window she can drive to that's already hers. Not mine. Hers, I'll keep it ready. Below it, another entry, years on. Bad winter." She cried in the night, thinking I was asleep, about the baby that never came. Couldn't find the words to comfort her. Never can. To her face. Came out hereafter and lit the wick and sat a while for her, same as I sit for the others, only she'll never know it was for her. Someday she will. Page after page, the whole marriage seen from the inside of the quiet man she had thought she could not reach. Every sorrow she had ever carried alone he had seen. Every night she thought he was cold or distant or off keeping his own company, he had driven out to a silent telephone exchange and set a lamp burning and sat, in the dark, for her, keeping a vigil she never knew was being kept. He had loved her the only way he knew how, which was to hold a light against the day she would need it, and to never once take credit for it, because credit would have made it a debt, and he did not want her to owe him. He wanted it free. He wanted it hers. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before he died. The hand was weaker, but she could read it. "I'm going soon and I can feel it. When I'm gone, she'll come out to sell this place. Because she's practical and she won't see the point of it. And that's all right. Let her come. The books will tell her. Wendell will tell her the rest. And she'll find this green book with her name on it, and she'll understand that every flame I ever set in that window, all 50 years of them, the very first one, was always for her. I kept it burning for everybody's grief. But I kept it burning for hers most of all. And there was one line more, at the very bottom of the page, written so faintly she had to bring the lamp close to read it, and when she read it she made a sound in the empty room that was half a sob and half a laugh, because it was the thing he had never once managed to say to her face in 31 years. "It's yours now, Orla. It always was. The door's not locked. It never was." She sat with the green book against her chest for a long time while the lamp burned and the plane's wind moved against the tall pane of glass, and she was not lonely. That was the strange thing she noticed, sitting alone in a dead building on a cold night with $46 to her name and a husband 3 weeks in the ground. She was not lonely. For the first time since she had woken beside a body gone still in the gray light, she felt held, and it was the building that held her, and the man who had kept it, and all the years of quiet love she had walked straight through and never seen. The worthless place had turned out to be the most valuable thing she owned. What made it so was not the copper and not the brick. It was the account of quiet good her husband had tended in it for 50 years, and the fact that her own name was written in the very center of it, and had been, all along. But there were still the back taxes. The sum the assessor had named, due when the month ran out, and $46 to her name, and a pleasant young assessor with a demolition scheduled for the spring thaw. Orla knew that understanding what she had been given was not the same as keeping it, and she had no intention of letting the county pull down the one place in the county that had held her husband's soul, not now that she knew what it was. She lay awake that night doing the arithmetic that has no answer, and toward morning she made a decision that Halvard, she thought, would have hated and understood in the same breath. She was going to break his rule. She meant to tell the town. She did it at the church, on the Sunday, because it was the only place the whole town gathered at once. When the service ended, she stood up at the front, a lean silver-haired widow in her one good dark dress. And her voice shook at first, and then steadied, and she told them. She told them Halvard had bought the abandoned exchange for $1 and kept it 50 years. She told them what it had been. She did not read any names, and she was careful to say she never would, that the sacred part would stay sacred, that not one soul would ever learn who else had come. But she told them the exchange had a lit window in it that had been dark since Halvard passed, and that the county meant to knock it down in the spring for want of $300 and some odd in back taxes, and that she thought, before they let that happen, they ought to know what they were tearing down. Then she sat back down, and the church was very quiet. The particular quiet of a room full of people each privately doing the same arithmetic in their own hearts. What happened next she had not planned and could not have planned. It was old Wendell Faucine who stood up first, leaning hard on his cane, and said in his dry rustle, "I came. After my wife. And after my boy." Halvard sat with me till the whistle blew, more nights than I can count. He sat down. And then, one at a time, around that church, people began to stand. A feed store owner, a young mother with a baby on her hip, Cyril DeForest from the co-op, who did not quite look at anyone as he got heavily to his feet, Delphine Aumont, Rufus Selk, Ivy Cormier. One after another, all through the pews, the people of Kettle Bend stood up to say, without saying a word, "I came too." Each of them had thought they were the only one. Each of them had carried the shame of their worst night alone, sure that no one else in that clean, respectable town had ever needed a burning window at 2 after midnight. And now they stood, and they looked around, and they saw each other standing, and the terrible private loneliness that Halvard had spent 50 years absorbing came apart in the light, all at once in front of them all. There was not a dry eye in the building. The collection plate that went around after did not stop at the sum the county wanted. It did not stop at 1,000. Kettle Bend, it turned out, had been waiting 50 years for a way to pay a debt it had never been allowed to name. And now there was a way, and the money for the taxes was the least of it. Orla paid the county its $318 on the last day of the month, and she watched the pleasant young assessor take the demolition off his spring schedule with the look of a man who has learned that his file did not have the whole of it. The exchange was hers, clean, no debt of gratitude on it, exactly as Halvard had wanted it. But she found she did not want to keep the flame burning alone, and that was where the last piece of the story came to her, on a cold night not long after, in the shape of a knock at the arched door. She had lit the lamp and stood it at the glass out of habit and love, and near 11 o'clock there came 3 soft raps, and when she opened it there stood a girl, 19, perhaps 20, thin in a coat too light for the plains cold, a canvas bag over one shoulder, and a look in her eyes that Orla recognized instantly because she had worn it herself 11 days after the funeral, the look of a person who has run out of places to be. The girl had seen the glow from the county road. She did not have a story ready, and Orla did not ask for one. She only stepped back as Wendell had taught her without teaching her, and she said the thing that mattered. "The door's not locked," Orla said. "It never is. Come in out of the cold. There's tea, and the stove's going, and you don't have to say a word if you don't want to. We'll just keep watch through the night together a while." The girl did not move for a moment. "I can't pay you anything," she said. "I don't have anything." "I know," Orla said gently. That's rather the point of the place. Nobody who comes here owes a thing. My husband saw to that. Now come in before we let all the heat out the door." "Why would you do this?" the girl said, "for somebody you never met?" "Because somebody kept a light burning for me once," Orla said, "when I thought there was nobody left in the world to do it. And I found out it had been burning the whole time. Come in, child." And the girl came in, and Orla got her warm, and she did not ask her name, but she wrote in the newest logbook that night, in her own hand under 50 years of Halvard's, the first entry that was hers. A girl came, cold and running from something, set the lamp going and sat with her till she could sleep. Didn't need to know the rest. The girl stayed. Her name, when she gave it in her own time, was Mireille, and she had a good hand for figures, and by the spring she was keeping the books at the exchange as a town needs someone to keep the books, writing down who came in the night, never the why, never a name spoken aloud on Main Street. Orla taught her what Wendell had taught her, what Hildebrand had taught a lonely boy a lifetime before. An exchange is not wires and brass. It is the place a town's voices come together in the dark. And the only job that ever mattered is to hold a light for the ones who cannot bear the dark, and to sit on the line with them until morning, and to ask nothing, and to owe nothing, and to keep a little back for the one who comes next with nothing at all. Orla Vandermeer lived out her years in Kettle Bend as the keeper of the abandoned telephone exchange that had turned out to be the most alive place in the county. She never grew rich in the way the county understood riches. The building stayed worth $1 on the assessor's card, obsolete wiring, no salvage, and Orla let it, because she had learned that the things a town writes off are so often the things holding it together underneath. She kept the $46, in fact, in the coffee can, on the shelf, and she never spent it, because a person ought to remember the night they had almost nothing, and found they had everything. And every evening at dusk, on the northern plains where the winter dark comes early and stays long, she carried the old kerosene lamp to the tall front window of the brick exchange and set it burning, amber against the cold, as her husband had set it every night for 50 years, as the old operator had set it before him, so that anyone driving the county road on the worst night of their life would see, out at the edge of town, a single burning window in a building everyone said was dead, and know that the door was not locked, and that it never had been, and that somebody was keeping watch, holding a light against the night, waiting to sit with them till morning. The dead places, it turned out, held what the living forgot, and the lamp is still burning,